Computer. Okay, good evening and welcome everyone. As you know, this is Dan Winter, FractalU.com, FractalField.com. This is our weekly FractalU melodrama. I mean fun stuff. I mean advanced science of cosmic geometry. And we have many guests with us tonight. Tufan Guven, who made an amazing presentation last week, is here. And Jennifer Marquis from Australia, who's our speaker next week on coherent lucid dreaming as a group, worked shamanically in Australia many years. Jenny and I were just talking 35 years friendship. So I recommend Jenny's course next week on how you coach a group to lucid dream together. Did I express that well, Jenny? So
yes, beautiful.
So tonight's conversation. Now, I don't want to intimidate everyone by saying this is advanced physics. No, this is meant to be playful physics. However, this is an extension of the first presentation I gave, which is on Star Trek physics, charge collapse, the cause of gravity and consciousness. So the title of tonight's talk is called PlanckPhire, Conjugate Fractal Charge Collapse, Cause of Gravity and Consciousness. That's the title. And I have a bunch of pictures. It's fun. And there's an important point to be made here, that successful charge collapse is in conventional physics, is agreed to be the cause of gravity and the cause of consciousness. I'm going to explain that. So it is not new information that successful charge collapse is the cause of gravity and the cause of consciousness. That's old information, and we're going to discuss that. The new information I'm going to present tonight is what is the cause of charge collapse. So conventional science is clear. Successful charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. Old information. The new information is what causes charge collapse. That's the billion-dollar question. And so before I start that little slideshow, I'd like to invite you to join in a little fantasy for a moment. Imagine you're in the mind of Einstein and you're trying to work out this unified field. And the unified field essentially says, well, the same stuff, which is electromagnetism, is also gravity. That's what a unified field is. Otherwise, you're schizophrenic if you think gravity is made of a different stuff than electromagnetism. I call that schizophrenia. It ain't good. So Einstein was clear he needed a unified field, and he knew that what's happening in an atom is taking the same stuff, which is called charge. Charge is what an electron is made of. It's a superfluid, circulating, rotating, and when that superfluid rotates, stores a bit of mass called an electron and a proton. So when charge collapses successfully, then something comes out the center. It has to. The charge can't go nowhere. So it's very clear, crystal clear to everyone who's thought about this, that in fact, whatever's coming out the center of an atom to turn charge into gravity, if gravity is the same stuff as electromagnetism, which is charge, then the only thing that can be coming out the center is something that is a result of successful charge collapse, which I call implosion, actually. So if you just think about it for a moment, it's quite clear that charge collapse has to be the cause of gravity, because charge can't just disappear when it goes into the center of an atom and comes out as gravity. It's the same stuff. Where did it go? Well, remember, Einstein didn't have the benefit of Tom Bearden saying, here are the equations that prove that the longitudinal wave that comes out of fractal conjugate charge collapse is what gravity is made of. So Einstein didn't have the benefit of knowing that, in fact, out the center of the imploding atom is a kind of electromagnetism called longitudinal compressional wave. And that's the stuff of gravity waves. You know, Bearden rather proved it, and Einstein didn't know. And Einstein, of course, did not know that fractality is the definition of perfected collapse. And Einstein did not know that golden ratio, self-similarity, is the perfection of fractality. So there's a lot of things he didn't know, but yet still he comes up from his meditation and says, the solution of the unified field is perfected charge collapse. He at least knew that. And do you see why it's obvious that the charge has to collapse successfully and non-destructively in order for gravity to exist? actually, because that charge can't just disappear out the center of an atom. It has to be turned into something else. Well, now we know what it is. It's turned into a longitudinal wave, which is what a gravity wave is made of. So you see, it is obvious that charge collapse is the mechanism of gravity. That's obvious and old information. We wish to provide new information that we now have discovered the only successful cause of charge collapse is conjugate fractal phase conjugation, Planck times integer exponents of golden mean ratio. And I call that now newly, I call that PlanckPhire. PlanckPhire, right? And that's the first animation. So it's rather obvious that if you figured out the cause of charge collapse, you figure out the cause of gravity. This is obvious. Now, what was in the heads of all of these physics of consciousness aficionados from Gary Schwartz and the Wigner and Johnny von Neumann? They all said consciousness is the cause of charge collapse, or they said charge collapse is the cause of consciousness, and we have that in the slides. But why, when you just think about it, why is it obvious that charge collapse causes consciousness? Is that trickier? Well, remember, those people did not know that Bill Tiller measured the fact that focused attention causes charge to implode, become centripetal or collapse. They didn't know that at the time, that Bill Tiller made dozens of measurements proving focused human attention causes charge to implode, compress, collapse. So now that we know that, in fact, Bill Tiller's measure that focused attention causes charge to collapse fits perfectly, but they didn't know that. And the other thing that they didn't know was that when consciousness is created in the brain, it's effectively a plasma tornado. That's what it is. It's a vortex made of charge, which has come to a point where the waves are sorted. And the nature of that sorting embeds that information into a longitudinal array, which is the very nature of consciousness. And now that's getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But when we see where you focus through a pinhole and it turns inside out, and consciousness is the implosion in the pinhole, like in the pinhole camera, and that in fact, John Dee spent years using where light scintillates at the center of a vortex. He used that scintillation, literally the turning inside out point, as a way to communicate with spirits, angels, ghosts, and ancestors. So that inside out point is the very nature of consciousness for a very specific reason, because it connects with the compression into the longitudinal array, which is, as we say, the stuff of the collective unconscious. But the more simple and obvious reason that most physics of consciousness studies conclude that charge collapse is the cause or effect of consciousness is pretty simple, because all of physics knows that there is nothing but waves of charge, obviously. So effectively, every wave is blinking on and off at the time of Planck and the length of Planck, and that ping pong balls blinking on and off we call matter, and that's caused by rotation.
If we can make it simpler, can we call it the center of the torus so that people can understand easier as the topology?
That's very nice. Yes, I think that's very appropriate. So essentially, what's blinking is the center of a torus, the center of a vortex. Absolutely. Thank you, Tuva. That makes total sense. Yes. But the point about charge collapse is because if you look at something, say to measure it, this is the quandary of consciousness. If you look at something to measure it, you must freeze it for a moment. You have to choose a still point. Well, actually, matter doesn't actually have a still point. No, it keeps going. So consciousness has to create a still point in order to observe something. And that artificial creation of that still point is part of why conventional physics of consciousness people say consciousness is caused by charge collapse, because you've artificially frozen it for something that, in a sense, can't be frozen. So that's why conventional scientists call it charge collapse. But yet, we now know that something else is going on, because when you create that still point, you create a compression node which touches a longitudinal array, which is the very nature of perception. Now, that's a deeper science. And for that, we need the slideshow. But I'm just giving you a little background here to say that if we can now show in the next hour clearly and well the physics of the cause of charge collapse, then it would be conventional physics that we have then stated the cause of gravity and the cause of consciousness. If we can describe accurately the cause of charge collapse, phase conjugate, golden ratio, implosion, charge collapse, tuned to Planck. That's the new information. We now describe accurately the cause of the charge collapse, which causes gravity and consciousness. So the point is that if you can understand why charge collapse is important, then you can understand why implosion is important. Okay, now we're going to try the little share screen thing here. Keynote.
Yeah, there's a question about what you just said. What does array in the longitudinal array means?
Very appropriate question. Thank you, Tufan. Yes. So an array is the fact that when the compressional wave comes out the center of, say, the atom of the proton, which is, by the way, nested platonically, the protons are arranged platonically, and so is electrons, charge collapse. But what comes out the center is a longitudinal wave, which bounces to the next center of compression, because only at the next center of compression will it exchange inertia with the transverse, which can contain heat, the up and down component. So the compressional wave we call longitudinal, which is what gravity is made of, has to go to the next node in that array. Most classically, for example, the Dodecaecosa Earth grid, the Dodecaecosa nature of DNA, and the Dodecaecosa nature of the arrangement of masses in the universe. It's all dodeca, because that's golden ratio, and that's the perfected array for charge distribution based on fractal golden ratio. And that array then is where you can, on the Earth grid, for example, do telepathy and have sacred space and all the fun stuff, because you can touch the longitudinal compressor nodes in that array. That, for example, is why if you want to do phone calls to ancestors, you pretty much need to know where that array is. You know, Kozyrev mirrors making telepathy, or where the Kogis made phone calls to ancestors. It's all about that array, which are the standing wave compression nodes in the fluid, the superfluid called charge, where at the point of compression, the longitudinal inertia exchanges information with the transverse, which is basically what this picture is about here. This is the node in that array where the longitudinal exchanges inertia with the transverse. So this lecture is called PlanckPhire. If you take Planck times phi, you get PlanckPhire. And oh, we've got a gorgeous little animation for that. You've seen it before. So that is golden ratio times Planck at the center. And PlanckPhire then nests in this array. See, that's a sine wave nested by golden ratio, and it nests then in this array, which enables turning inside out and compression. So that is, I call that PlanckPhire, phi times Planck, very simple, which is perfected fractal implosive charge collapse, the cause of gravity and consciousness, Planck length or time times phi, golden ratio, to the integer n powers, to exponents, whole number exponents of golden ratio. And that discussion is at fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. So now you've all seen these pictures. This is just you. So this is what happens when you multiply Planck times golden ratio. You get hydrogen radii, ATP, the British foot, the definition of sacred dimension. You get the only exact two frequencies that make photosynthesis. You get the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics of bliss, the most important frequencies in the body, like the Mayer wave. You get Venus year, Earth year, galactic year precession, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the harmonics which implode out of chaos into negentropy. This is what those equations look like. And one version is based on Planck time, and the other version is based on Planck time divided by h bar. And so if you made a visual of that, you would see this cascading toward the center of nested dodeca based on golden ratio. And this is, in fact, what we later proved is the geometry of hydrogen. And that 76-degree angle of that vortex here, for example, Charlie Zeiss is talking about the angle of the vortex from Schauberger and the angle of the vortex from refraction, which is how you create scintillation and talk to ancestors and implode by golden ratio and squirt plasma out of pyramids. That 76-degree angle is the base angle of Russian pyramids and the peak angle of Egyptian pyramids, because that's what allows you to implode plasma into a working squirt gun. And that squirt gun does this basically, which is converts transverse EMF to longitudinal EMF, which is squirts out the nose of the squirt gun, the pine cone, at Planck threshold, and becomes a gravity wave, a transverse wave. So that's old. We've talked about that before. Cause of charge collapse, cause of negentropy, cause of gravity. So the sort of astounding thing is that, Einstein said, charge collapse is what we need to figure it out, but he didn't figure it out. And then Wigner, von Neumann, Penrose, and Stuart Hameroff all agree that charge collapse is a cause of consciousness. But none of them address the question, what is the cause of charge collapse? And I call that a naked elephant in the room. And we did this in the last course. Okay, so I'm suggesting that the Nobel Committee should take note. If in fact we have described the cause of charge collapse, I think the Nobel Committee should know. I'm joking here, but you get the flavor that once we know the cause of perfected charge collapse, we've answered, all the gorgeous questions like alchemy and negentropy, implosion, gravity, consciousness. So in the first course, we covered how that becomes a description of how warp propulsion versus impulse power worked. And this is old, that's from the last course. That's why we call it Star Trek physics. For example, why a water vortex makes gravity, because the convergence angle, here we are, let's do it again. This is a water vortex. At the 76-degree angle, the charge compressing at the correct golden ratio based angle causes implosion at the center enough to spit out a coherent compressional longitudinal wave out the other side directionally, which is why this device, in the case of Schauberger, made voltage from gravity and made propulsion directly. And this is also why the Mercury vortex in Viman and Nazi Bell made gravity, because you could implode charge at the correct angles to spit out the other side a coherent longitudinal EMF. And that's the mechanism of gravity. So this is Wigner and von Neumann talking about charge collapse and consciousness. And one says the wave function, collapse of the wave function leads to consciousness. And the other said consciousness leads to the collapse of the wave function. That's sort of like asking whether a tornado starts with a vortex or a vortex starts with a tornado. And so this is the famous paper by Stuart Hameroff, who worked with Penrose, to say that consciousness is the collapse of the wave function. It's not new information, but again, not knowing what causes wave functions to collapse, although they did talk about Platonic values embedded in space-time geometry. We're going to learn that Platonic nesting, like Star Mother Kit, which Kepler said is the mechanism of gravity in the solar system, is right. The reason that Platonic nests perfect charge collapse is because you can't nest Platonics without golden ratio. You can't get a cube in a dodec without golden ratio. You can't get a dodec into an ecosa without golden ratio. So the reason Platonic nests is the model for planetary orbitals, Kepler was right, is because Platonic nests cause charge collapse, which stabilizes gravity. So this is about the neuroskeletal mechanism of consciousness, equivalent of consciousness to charge collapse. This is like when Nassim said you Penrose tile Planck dimensions around a proton, and you see why a proton makes gravity, because of charge collapse. Okay. So implosive recursive turning inside out is the cause of consciousness, obviously, like the plasma vortex in the center of your brain creates the eyeball. So this is what we want to meditate on one more time, that, when John Dee famously, we think, designed the Newport Tower, which was basically a pinhole camera where the inverse view was on the other side of the pinhole on the wall. And the interesting point is, at the throat of the pinhole, what's happening? Where it turns inside out, what's happening there is phase conjugation is touching the longitudinal array. Hello, that's where the compression point does the magic. That's why John Dee used a similar principle, scintillating light through a pinhole, to call ancestors, because you could touch the longitudinal array at that pinhole. Call it the rainbow point of the vortex, where the turning inside out happens. That is the nature of consciousness. So as we spoke many times, that when Bill Tiller measured that consciousness causes charge to compress, we now know why, because charge collapse is that compression success. More importantly, so here, when we measured, we talked about this last time, but I want to talk about it one more time, actually. So we measured Jean-Charles Moyen's brain waves, who's the famous secret space program survivor, French, wonderful guy, great friend, who has many times bilocated with witnesses. And the moment before he bilocated, this is the brainwave frequency signature, which is the same as the kids who could see without their eyes. It was a golden ratio and octave, golden ratio in blue and octave in pink, brainwave EEG power spectra cascade going from alpha in green up to gamma in gray, about 44 hertz. Now, the reason that, remember, John Charles' coherence, though, was much greater. In other words, for example, the amplitude of these peaks were huge compared to the kids who were seeing without their eyes, but it was the same set of ratios. Now, I want to emphasize that the only way you could get an octave cascade and a golden ratio cascade nest inside your head to make that frequency signature is literally is if you were making this inside your brain. That's the only way you could get a golden ratio and an octave cascade nested one inside the other. It's obvious why. The octave cascade stabilizes, freezes it, hex crystal, and then the golden ratio cascade implodes it. If you don't get both, again, a platonic nest enabling collapse. So the reason John Charles was able to bilocate was he set up that portal of implosion with powerful coherence in his brain waves, where the longitudinal node inside his head at the point of perception became implosive and squirted powerfully into the longitudinal array, in this case, to the beach. Now, dramatically, Jean-Charles reports on multiple occasions that just before he bilocated using this frequency signature in his brainwaves, his vision would split. In one eye, he would see where he was. In the other eye, he would see where he was going. I suggest you meditate on that, sleep on that, and think about what that means. It means that the vortex in the center of your head has become a portal. Talk about an array. So, and remember, these golden ratio cascades in the brainwaves are tuned to Planck. So suddenly we are getting compelling measurement info about how kids see without their eyes, the same signature. The vortex forms inside the head. The only possible physics of consciousness is the charge collapse tuned to golden ratio of that cascade. And also, by the way, stargates and portals and the advanced stuff. So we looked at this picture last time, the reason this vortex, piezo dope, made voltage from gravity, because this implosion approximating 76 degrees would would provide a way out for charge at the center, basically. And these are the publications we did on this. We covered this last time. So we've published the generalized wave equations to prove that golden ratio solves the problem of compression, implosion. They're Navier-Stokes, and they're Klein-Gordon wave, generalized wave. This was actually Klein-Gordon generalized wave equations proved golden ratio is the maximum constructive wave interference in general, and therefore the solution to compression, and therefore the solution to gravity. And this is published. So these are the papers, and that's the top-down view of hydrogen. We've gone through this, and here's this turning inside-out point from the movie Stargate and Implosion. So this we've covered many times. So this is how you, if you knew how plasma becomes mindful, implosive wave collapse, then you would know what ghosts do, how tornadoes are steered, plasma heals, origin of angels, how lucid dreaming works. All of these questions are answered after you know what caused that charge collapse, and therefore what spit out the coherent longitudinal into that array, collective unconscious, and the gravity grid. This is more on hydrogen golden ratio, and you've all seen the picture of what it looks like. So in this section, we're supposed to do slides 1 to 26. You've seen these pictures before. This is just the visuals. So here, the waves add and multiply recursively, constructively, because of golden ratio, and that accelerates the charge towards center because the phase velocities add and multiply, and that causes acceleration towards center from fractal compression. And that acceleration of charge towards center is named the gravity. All seen these pictures before. Okay, this. And so we go up to slide 9. So you've seen, so these are those frequencies then in the title, the spine liquid pump, and therefore the physics of Kundalini. Note the Mayer wave here at 0.1 hertz, all predicted by equation, the physics of bliss, basically. This is how the brain waves fit the Schumann waves, fit the equation, all golden ratio times Planck charge collapse. And this is in our papers on the physics of gravity. I'm sorry, in the physics of Kundalini, that you take these low frequencies in the spine liquid and in the brain waves and in the breath and the spine liquid, and they all fit the same cascade, the Schumann. It's all about charge collapse. Okay, now I'm going to turn off this share from this section and stop screen share. How are we doing on questions, Tufan? That was the first third of them.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. Would you like to go over a couple of them?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, first one from Ellen. So if I stir water in a container in a perfect implosive manner, will I see a change in the weight of the container since implosion results in gravity?
Well, if we take theimploder.com as an example of the perfect vortex, and if that vortex has hard water, as piezoelectric as Schauberger did and as biodynamics does, then you do get implosion of charge out the center of the vortex, and Schauberger made some gravity. In fact, it was called the repulsine. Now, does that change the weight of the container that the vortex is in? Probably not. However, if you were to do it at higher amplitudes, now remember in the Mercury vortex at the center of the Vimana Nazi bell, you have two cylinders counter-rotating powerfully. You have an iron powder doped red mercury, which then gives it magnetic implosion and inertial, the high inertia of the mercury itself, combined, imploding at the correct angle, spitting out a very powerful longitudinal, enough to fly. That was Vimana, Nazi bell, Haunebu. And we've actually done some equations on that to how to optimize that vortex, fractalfield.com/propulsion. So in that case, you could make enough to change weight, absolutely. And you can do it with water, with the piezoelectrically doped water. It wouldn't work. If the water was non-conductive, you wouldn't get too much. But if you got some piezo rock powder in there, and that's one of the reasons why the imploder.com vortex is so powerful. It works particularly well in hard water because that makes the vortex more piezo. So there's lots of discussion about that at theimploder.com.
Another one about the water vortex. Astro asks, in the example of the vortex for water, what is the diameter of the exit point?
Yeah, well, for theimploder.com, our primary vortex has a 1/2-inch discharge, but the little vortex nozzle cone inside has a very fine point on it. So it's certainly bigger than Planck. But, you can build a vortex of any size, the size of a galaxy or the size of a hydrogen atom. And in both cases, it could make some gravity. So scale is not the issue. The issue is ratio. Next question.
Ian asks, why don't we have video footage of the bilocation or teleportation?
Actually, Jean-Charles Moyen would be very happy to show you his professionally made movies, going on 3 of them now, South Shore, and we appear in that film, professionally made film, where we measured his brainwaves. And he talks about interviews, the various witnesses who saw him come back from the beach with sand between his toes and a water bottle, with witnesses that he did in fact bilocate multiple times. And he's presented what most, I think, would consider compelling evidence. And I think it's instructive. I don't even think the issue is not to doubt him. We know stargates and portals work. They're all over the literature, every ET we've ever talked to. Boring question. The more interesting question is, how do they work? But yes.
Do we have a link to the videos?
Jean-Charles Moyen, M-O-Y-E-N, the film that we did with him is at flameinmind.com/lucidbrain. And that also links to his other films. Jean-Charles is quite a guy. He's from Canada, speaks French, but he speaks enough English to be very beautiful and has had dramatic and compelling experiences. And we've helped him to sort the physics.
Thank you. Another one, in order to inhibit the longer wave and help embed to become a vaccine against the parasites, is it better or necessary to leave on a strong ley line point?
Yeah, I called it a vaccine for the Orion Wars. I love the question. Well, what we always said was, if you had your own source of bliss, meaning ability to implode, and that charge implosion, your own bliss, creates the charge radiance that we call bliss and ecstasy, and that implosion of charge at center will toast the parasites. That's the fundamental idea. That means if you have a source of bliss, you won't have stomach parasites or astral parasites. That's the theory. Now, access to an Earth grid magnetic line, sacred space crosspoint, is always extremely healthy for any of that, because it helps invite that compression. So whether you want telepathy or bliss or phone calls to ancestors or Gothic cathedrals or labyrinths or cozy rev mirrors, all of the above, you pretty much need an Earth grid magnetic line cross. In fact, they specify the nanoteslas of the minimum magnetic flux density you should measure before you install your cozy rev mirror for military quality telepathy. So yes, the Earth grid magnetic line. What that means in practice is it's helpful if you can do some basic dowsing to find out where in your house and your yard and your city the rose comes to center.
Then Justin asks, how do we find these magnetic lines?
Yeah, well, we say that basic ability to do some dowsing is survival related. That means if you cannot feel anything when you cross a strong Earth magnetic line, that means you're in trouble. It's simple, really. The more you have access to some form of bliss, the more your DNA braid implodes, and the more of a conductor you become. So eventually, good dowsers with access to bliss, they don't need to use a hammer to move the water vein into the well. They talk to the water vein and it moves. That's advanced. But the basics of the beginning is you gotta be able to feel basic magnetic lines. Go to your local dowser, geobiologist, study goldenmean.info/dowsing. goldenmean.info/geobiology, but it's essential. I'm not saying you need to feel all the Hartman, Payray, Curry lines and, advanced dowsing. No, but basic, simple dowsing. The way, for example, we just successfully installed a labyrinth here in South France that dramatically appears to have created desperately needed rain. The way we started, I just walked across that field and waited till I felt my hair stand up a little bit. And then we found the center. Yeah. And we put those stones in that labyrinth and we could feel that. My hair still stands up what we felt at the center. And by the way, we got rain. So yeah, you need to feel a magnetic line or you can't feel.
Ajda asks, what are the axiotonal lines?
Axio means equivalent or balanced. Tonal means harmonics, basically. So axiotonal, I believe, is kind of another name for the geometry of primary ley lines. For example, if you see the classic dodecaecosa Earth grid, those lines could be called axiotonal. I'm not sure, there could be other meanings for that term, but axiotonal means the balance points in the tones of the standing wave of the grid.
Thank you. And Anthony asks, what is the difference between attention and consciousness?
Very close. Attention is the ability to find a still point. For example, you cannot play a violin string or a guitar string unless you create a still point. So the ability to create that still point then chooses the wavelength. That's the physics of creation. By creating still points among waves, we create. That's why they say only love bends the light, only love creates. So the density of your attention, let me give you an example. Gurdjieff said, do not begin sacred gymnastic, which is bliss movement, until you can put your attention in your baby finger with enough density to cause it to tingle. Now, we must meditate as electrical engineers on what that is. The density of your attention in your baby finger, when you can cause it to tingle with your attention. Is it tingling yet? Okay, that's a test. If your attention has enough density to cause the plasma to form a still point. Once that inner strength grows, then you can be like the Draco. You can form a vice-like grip around anybody else's head. You can steer tornadoes. It's all the same physics. So start by putting feeling in your finger. So that's attention, the ability to create that still point. And then the standing waves begin to grow around that still point until eventually you steer stars. So that's what attention is, clearly. And is that the same as consciousness? Pretty close. Consciousness requires that kind of still point, but except as a plasma vortex initially located in your head, in the center of your brain. But clearly, once that plasma vortex gets inertia, you can take that vortex outside your head and see from it. Near-death experience, remote viewing, astral travel, what you do after death, lucid dreaming is all. So understanding consciousness as a plasma vortex, not limited to your head, that's consciousness.
I would also like to add that light orbs, this is what you are seeing, and how to make this a simple form of how to make you tingle on one finger is something that this is your diet, this is your discipline, this is what converts to your magnetic lines. And if we have to look at each city, each area that all our family is in, we have to learn to generate and learn to go to higher forms of energy that is surrounding us. So
I like that, Russell. Yeah, this is Russell, by the way. Russell, everyone is involved with our discussion group on Discord and did the major program for FractalU. Russell's amazing, from Ukraine, Odessa, and he's very psychoactive, clearly. But yes, in fact, what comes to mind, Russell, is I thought it was so cool when Iris's teacher, who works with teaching kids around the world to see without their eyes, he's from New Zealand, a wonderful guy. And he's saying, well, usually when we get kids to the point of inner bliss where they can see without their eyes, it's very frequent that those kids start seeing and talking to their ancestors in the room. and he said that phenomena, in terms, is like an orb, right? It's a plasma. It's their ancestors showing up, and the kids can see them. Now, that phenomena is accepted in Eastern cultures. So the teachers of remote kids seeing without they just talk about that. But Western teachers, it freaks out the parents, so they can't mention it. I thought it was cool. So that inner coherence is doing that enables them to focus their inner eye. It's not just seeing without their eyes. Suddenly, it's ancestor memory, it's clairvoyance, it's Pandora's box, man. Living plasma, orbs, coherence. Oh my. Any other thoughts, please? We're having fun, are we?
Malena asks, is the tingling in your finger when you pay attention to it due to staring at it and focusing mitogenic radiation to it from your eyes?
I would hypothesize that probably is part of it, but the majority, I would think, is the actual ADP 1.91 angstrom plasma radiance of the microwave coherence of cell metabolism when it's focused, for example. So effectively what's happening is the body's spitting out this microwave all the time, which is part of your aura, how we measured Kundalini with Bob Dratch, for example. And so when you create that still point, electrically in the nerve network in your baby finger, that still point starts a do loop inside a do loop inside a do loop, and suddenly the aura begins to pulse and grow. So the blood got focused, the nerves got focused, the donuts got focused, and the plasma aura started to grow. I mean, it's obvious, wherever you place attention, there things happen. So there is some aspect of mitogenic radiation from your eyes, but largely it's the aura itself getting phase coherent around the still point you generate with your attention. Very important concept.
There is some demand for your applications on Android, for the Android versions. And someone says, I unfortunately don't have iPhone. Is there an app or binaural beat you can recommend to help allow for phase conjugation, and would 50 hertz be optimal?
Yes, so it is true. There is some limitation. We have about 6 iOS, iPhone, iPad apps, craniosacral-app.com, flameinmind.com, iThrive.com, realheartcoherence.com. These all work on iPhone, iPad, iOS only. And that's a limitation. We have had active negotiations with an advanced Android programmer for more than a year now. Please understand that Android has far more hardware and software fractionation. So bringing this to Android, when you have a lifetime, I mean, Patrick Botti has put half a lifetime into putting all those features into flameinmind.com, and getting it to Android is messy, honestly. So we're putzing with it, but I can't predict accurately when it's going to happen. Meantime, it's so much fun. Maybe it's worth buying a used iPhone. What can I say? By the way, I'd like to make one more comment. People have appropriately criticized that Flame in Mind, most of these apps, use Bluetooth. We had no way around that. I feel that Bluetooth is really not good news. I mean, you can feel. Now, my reply to that for now, since we had no other choice, is, you can get some really fun brainwave training in about 5 minutes flat. And during that time, the Bluetooth ain't going to mess you up too bad. But I don't recommend leaving it on for long periods, no, because I think Bluetooth Bluetooth is disturbing. Okay, that's my response to that question. Go ahead.
We have a new question from our Discord discussion group, from Dance to YouTube. Somehow, since childhood, I retained a sense of the still point, which I've been calling the 0 point or live energy force, since I borrow words that feel like a match to my experience. Thus, I access it and have shown a number of us where to look for an experience of it in ourselves. My question is actually broader, but where is the vortex leads to the still point and then array in the earth to keep our bot pods experiencing what we call gravitation? And what are the energy effects on us inside also, please?
Wow, that's a Sufi question. There's a Sufi exercise that addresses that question, I think. So you're kind of meditating and you get yourself rather centered, aligned with your center of gravity, and you feel your center of gravity in yourself. And then you track that center of gravity with your attention, that through the still point, into the center of gravity of the earth. And you consciously track the vortex wormhole, which I now know is a longitudinal array node, from your center of gravity, your heart or your dantian, to the earth center of gravity, till you can feel that and pulse and breathe Schumann with that. And then you track that to the sun center of gravity. And then you track that to, and you on and on and on. So by tracking the center of gravity, you're taking your attention to the point of maximum leverage. And that is evolution. That's the definition of what it is to be a sun god, when you can do that to the heart of the sun, for sure. So that is the still point. First starts with you, and that's a doorway into an array, which the whole array itself is an organ of perception.
These are all for the time being then.
Okay. Should we do a few more slides? Yes, all right. We're trying to make the point that charge collapse is the solution to so many problems in physics. And we're now going to, that was slide 1 to 32. The next slide, we're going to do 122 to 155. Let's just do a few more slides. So 122. Here we go, 122. So that's a picture of the array, the implosion of the array. These are the animations of the array. You've seen these before. And you've seen how that makes non-destructive compression possible. The soap bubble changes scale without changing ratio. And that's why New Scientist said the universe is fractal, and Nature magazine says the universe is dodeca, because that's how you make and stabilize gravity. And this is the actual picture of the masses of the universe in a dodeca. So many physicists already agree that fractality causes gravity. What they don't know is how. That's the point. And Andre Lind is one of them, because they haven't really meditated on what is a fractal electric field, which we say is golden ratio. And if you know, then you can see why the trapezoid of microwave in the EM drive makes gravity, because it conjugates and spits out a longitudinal. So this is the point, that when Kepler said planetary orbitals is a Platonic nest, what he meant was that nesting by golden ratio, which is what a Platonic nest is how you collapse charge and therefore stabilize gravity. Remember, golden ratio is the dominant geometry of orbital mechanics. Hello. And so this, then you see, once you begin to see that your chemistry teacher screwed up when it didn't show you that the electron shells are merely a Platonic nest. Hello? What does that tell you? The cube, pi suborbital, DNF, dodecaposid. And the same Platonic nest is precisely the physics of how you nest protons and neutrons, the hadrons in the nucleus. Charge collapse. And so this is how that array works, because the still points in the array can allow the conduction of a wave at golden ratio multiples times the speed of light. That's why and how stargates work. And this becomes the Vimana physics, the Nazi bell, and how the ancients used plasma tubes to create a Shem unto the Lord, which is rejuvenation. And here's the Schauberger repulsine principle. Again, spitting out a longitudinal wave at the center of a double vortex. Okay, I'm going to propose, since my my throat is kind of giving out here tonight. I'm going to finish this slideshow a little later. I'm sorry, guys, but I have a limitation with the throat. But I hope we've made the point that if you understood charge collapse, that successful charge collapse answers the most profound questions in physics: the nature of fusion, the nature of alchemy, the nature of gravity, the nature of consciousness. All of those questions are answered if you understand the cause of charge collapse. And now we do. Planck times golden ratio. That is new information, and that is a solution, and it's a practical solution. Our technologies, Flame in Mind, theimploder.com, therify.net, and the gravity and energy solutions are coming. All right. Did we have any fun? Any last questions?
That's great, Dan. Thank you for this beautiful information. But I would also like to remind, next week on February 5th, we are going to meet with Michael Welk, Katarina Sonborn, and we will talk about plasma, phase quantify, music, and remote healing. So please add this in your calendars, folks.
Yes, we have. Well, now I thought, was Jenny next week? Is Jenny in 1 week?
I think Jennifer is in 2 weeks' time, February 12th.
Yeah.
Okay, so February 5 is Michael Welk, who's amazing, doing healing with Quantify in Germany, and beautiful experiences with plasma, and can compare, verify, and quantify. So that's next week. And then the following week will be Jenny talking about the coherent lucid dreaming and lucid dreaming groups, how you carry your starseed into the stars by lucid dreaming together. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you had some fun. Remember that all of that science is at fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. I want to thank Tufan and Russell and Jenny, and thanks everybody for coming, and more fun next time.
Thank
you, Dan. Hope to see you guys next week.
Bye, everybody.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for those sweet little eyes. That's Russell's little one there. Thank you, Russell. Bye-bye.
Love this all so much. Thank you.
Thank you. We had fun. Bye. Bye.